See someone struggling or suspect that they're struggling, what's the best thing that you should do to help them?
The best thing is really to share things that you've done to help yourself, because oftentimes it can come off maybe condescending or hurtful if we say, like, you should go to therapy. It sounds helpful, but we all can benefit from therapy. So if you share some of your experiences in the therapeutic room, like, hey, I went to therapy and I was able to learn this triggered me and I have this new coping skill and I just feel better. And maybe it would be helpful if you try. So I think speaking in that way and sharing the things that work for you. I go on walks daily and I just feel like the load lifted off of my shoulder. So one, look at what are you already doing and then share that to others. Or if you feel like they're depressed or suicidal, there are certain avenues that you can do to reach out to contact a crisis line or the suicide hotline, or just sitting with someone. Sometimes we feel like, we have to do something, we have to say something, but some people's love language is like quality time or physical touch, and just being next to them is okay. Or some people's love language is affirmation, so just affirming them, like, hey, you look really nice today, I'm so proud of you. So again, just doing what's been working for you and what may work for that person depending upon what their love language is.
That was racial trauma specialist Ashley McGirt. 2020 has seen a renewed push in the fight for racial equity, but racism has been taking a toll on the mental health of the BIPOC community since long before 2020, as Ashley explains.
It's having a huge impact on the BIPOC community. It's taken a significant toll. For example, many people are experiencing anxiety, depression, and a lot of physiological symptoms. So I'm seeing clients come in with things like headaches, migraines, inability to sleep, even high blood pressure, and so much more. And these things are not new. It's just exacerbated now that we're experiencing so much racial unrest and daily protests.
And there has to also be that push and pull of like, I want to go out there, I want my voice to be heard, I need to make a stand. And there's a pandemic, I'm nervous about possibly catching the virus if I go out. Are people struggling with those issues as well?
Yeah, there's so many stressors. It's like when we think that we've seen it all, another one happens. So it's been the pandemic, it's been the protest, it's been the smog. And as a therapist, so many of the things that I actually recommend as coping skills were things like going outside, taking deep breaths. So those were eliminated as the quality of the air wasn't at a functionable level. So people couldn't really go outside and go on those walks. Not to mention with COVID, a lot of our other coping skills like the gyms and movie theaters were closed. Movie theaters are still closed. So a lot of people are really struggling during this time to really find creative ways to actually cope and heal amidst everything that we're going through.
Yeah, some days it just feels like, really? Something else?
Exactly. And we don't even have enough therapists to go out to everybody. I wish I could pull an Oprah, like, you get a therapist, you get a therapist. But the reality is the access to therapists, especially BIPOC clinician, is just so limited.
When we're talking about racial trauma, is that different than other kinds of trauma? Is it treated differently?
Yeah, it's very different than other types of trauma. So for example, as clinicians, when we treat things like PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, it's under the premise that the thing actually happened one time. Whereas with racialized trauma, it's constantly happening. My client can come to me in the therapy room, whether it be Zoom or in person, and as soon as they shut their computer off or leave my office, they experience racism. So we have to be creative when we're treating it. And also, it's not something that is in the DSM, which is the therapist Bible and how we actually diagnose and treat mental illness. It's a normal reaction to racism, just like grief. Grief isn't something that we treat. It's not in the DSM. It's a normal reaction. And many of us are experiencing grief from the loss of things that were prior to COVID. And now we're experiencing racialized trauma. And many of us were already experiencing racialized trauma. So it's just different in the fact that it's constantly happening and it's attributed from race-based stress.
What role, if any, do you think that destigmatizing mental health issues plays in the BIPOC community in terms of overall treatment?
It plays a huge role. We really need to work hard to destigmatize mental illness within BIPOC communities, because there's this myth that mental health treatment isn't available or isn't accessible to BIPOC communities, which essentially has been the reality. We also have to recognize the inherent racism that has been embedded in the mental health system. When we look at the founding fathers, it's people like Freud, Watson, Adler, Piaget. All of these people are predominantly white male or white female, and we're using their evidence-based practices to treat people of color. So clinicians like myself have to really get creative in applying these principles that were not made for people of color, but we're expected to treat people of color. So that's where the stigma lies. And then in the Black community, there's the stigma, just go to church, just pray about it, things like that. So we have to really tackle all of these different things at a community and a cultural level.
We keep hearing the phrase, and I have said it myself too, I hate 2020. I can't wait for this year to be over. But the truth is, of course, that the fight for racial equity and social justice has been going on for a long time, and the strong likelihood is that it will have to continue to go on for a long time. So what do you think is sort of the best way that people can still engage, but also do that in a way that doesn't compromise their own mental health?
Yeah, we have to be committed to change. All of us have to really do our part to be anti-racist, and we can't hope that someone else is going to make the change. There's something, whether small or large, that every one of us can actually do to make change. And like you said, we're all feeling like, 2020 is over, it's done, we don't like it, let's just get to 2021. But how do we know 2021 is going to be different if we're not making the commitment to make change? Because we can hope all day. I can hope that you're going to make 2021 better, but what am I doing internally or in my community or within myself to make sure, one, my mental health is okay, and also making sure my community is okay? So we all need to take actionable steps.
We have compiled a huge list of local and national mental health and crisis resources to share with you. No matter what you, your friends, or your family is dealing with, there is someone that you can call. Just text the word LIST to the number 33438 and we'll send a link right to your phone. That is LIST to 33438. Well, for parents, it can be a challenge to get our kids to talk about their feelings, and it is often even harder to know if we are saying the right things. So for some advice, I talked to Holly Gonzalez, a licensed mental health counselor with Primera Blue Cross.
It's important to be proactive and get this conversation started so that they can open up, ask them questions about their concerns or worries, what's coming up for them. Research shows that when we say what we're feeling out loud, it promotes brain integration. So this means bringing all the different parts together, the emotional with the logical and rational parts, to create a more balanced, calming effect. And this brings us to a place where we can regulate these strong emotions and leads to healthier responses when we are confronted with triggers and stress.
So we go in with the best of intentions, and oftentimes we as parents get it wrong. So what are the sort of common mistakes that parents make when they're trying to talk to their kids about these issues?
It can be uncomfortable at times. And sometimes we want to just move straight into problem solving or action planning or move away from that emotion. But what we want to do is provide connection, so they don't feel alone, but rather feel felt and understood. And we can do this by acknowledging and validating what they're going through. So using phrases like, it makes sense you would feel that way with everything that's going on. So we want to normalize but not minimize what they're going through, and really kind of sit there and stay for a while. I think it's important to provide a sense of empowerment and hope during this time. So letting them know that these emotions and even the bodily sensations like the heart pounding or the knots in the stomach, this is all an experience, not an identity. Science now tells us we can retrain our brains to respond differently. And with practice and over time, we can learn strategies to create healthier pathways in our brain. And eventually these can become our go-to responses.
What are some of those strategies? Because some of these we can all use ourselves, but we could really teach our kids how to do these at home, right?
I do think it's really important for adults to model self-care and some of these strategies. So first of all, we want to assure children, especially the little ones, that adults are working on a plan and doing our best to keep them safe. And then help them focus on what they can do, what they can have control over. Developing and maintaining a normal routine provides stability. And we want to get their input on that, what works for them, because it's not one size fits all. Everyone's unique. So mindfulness activities are extremely helpful as they emphasize focused attention and intention in the present moment. So we're not looking to the future and worried about that. We're not stuck in the past and ruminating on past problems. And we're really kind of taking that observer stance. What's going on with our thoughts and our bodies, and noticing these changes so that we can know when they're coming on. So taking time to really pause and breathe deeply from the diaphragm, and even having kids put their hands on their belly to feel it going in and out, can move us away from that sort of lower brain associated with the fight, flight, freeze, or faint response, and into that higher brain. Again, really wanting to access the parts that can calm us, that can make sense of things and help us to move forward.
The other sort of remarkable thing about the breathing techniques is how it can give you instant gratification. I mean, you can honestly feel it immediately. And for a lot of kids, that's probably important, right? They want to know it's working now.
And there's a lot of other techniques that can, help us to access that as well. There's self-soothing techniques like supportive touch, so hand on the heart or hand on the belly, that can help calm the nervous system. There's also a technique called tapping. And for little kids, they like the butterfly technique. But the idea is that if we practice these things when we're feeling safe and comforted and calm, then we can use it when we are confronted with stress and triggers.
In terms of starting a conversation like this, if you have a teenager, it's going to be different than talking to a little one. And a lot of teenagers do not like to feel like they are being diminished or talked down to. So what is the best jumping off point? Because a lot of us parents of teenagers know that just asking, how are you feeling, doesn't always get a real response. Or, okay, fine. And then they move on, right? Is there a key to engaging them?
For older kids, maybe watching some video clips or having a podcast going on in the background that is addressing some of the issues going on in the world today, and just kind of having it playing while you're cooking dinner or they're around. And then you can ask their thoughts. Oh, well, how does that impact you? Or what are your thoughts or feelings about that? Also, if you have close friends or family members that you trust, having a conversation with them, but again, in a place where the teen can hear what you're saying, that can be helpful too, to get that conversation started.
Such great advice. And you can find a blog post with even more of Holly's tips for parents at Primera.com. Well, we know exercise is good for the body, but it can have other benefits too. After the break, we'll give you another reason to get moving.